Hey everyone, welcome back to CryptoCache. We got a super important update today. Make sure you stick around. We're going to touch on some earning reports as well as some specific fundamental catalysts that are going to impact our basically our price action this week, specifically Fed rate decision and Jerome Powell conference. We're also going to take a quick look here at CME futures for Solana and Ethereum and some back-end liquidation data just to kind of round things out for us here. So stick around. We got a good one today. All right, folks, let's jump right into the back-end data first before we get to start, kind of see what's going on with the altcoins, because I do think it's relevant to understand the times and the dates for these things. Fed rate decision is this week here on Wednesday. Obviously, there's a Jerome Powell conference afterwards, too, that causes some choppy behavior, depending on if he's bullish or bearish or dovish or otherwise, basically. There's also Microsoft, Alphabet, and Meta earnings on Wednesday, too. So those are all things on Wednesday that'll cause the price action to kind of get a little crazy. Obviously, the most important I feel is President Trump summit here essentially on Thursday with the president of China there kind of talking about U.S. tariffs and on China. Okay, so important stuff there to be mindful of. That's all available on my Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. Be sure to use the links down below for that. What's also eligible to is an awesome deposit reward bonus and trading reward bonus here for Bitunix that goes between now and November 22nd. So take advantage of this, folks. Use my link to register. You'll be automatically eligible for future competitions. And at this point here, if you've already registered, just take advantage of it. Of course, you're eligible by default. Now, take a look here at Ethereum. Let's go ahead and start with a foundation and understand that there is a CME gap between 39.40 and 40.75. Okay, so the price action is probably more likely to pull back, mainly because Bitcoin should hit its 111 to 113K range here in the relative near future. It may not happen today. We're probably going to see some more manipulation today by pushing the price action higher, trapping late longs, and then dumping when those events occur. But just keep in mind that is kind of what's going on in the back end there. Same thing with Solana, 195 is that lower range too. So 195 and 39.50 are two areas to kind of just try to remember when you're trading these coins. Now, starting with Ethereum's open interest, just to double check, 4,200 is that local resistance for us, and we got some support at 40.50 below the price, and once more that psychological support of 4,000 and 3,900 is a secondary to that. So we got some pretty good support below the price. I'm not trying to propose that you short this coin. It's massively, it is pretty well overextended and due for a correction. There's a lot more people taking longs than shorts, so it's inherently more risky to short this coin. That's the concept. Now, taking a look on the left-hand side here, we can see Ethereum also has some liquidation upwards of 4,300. So this is the last 7 days worth of liquidation. Doesn't tell us a whole heck of a lot. Obviously, depends on how far out you zoom, but for the most part, majority liquidation has been fully swept to the upside and downside, at least within the last week's worth of trading. Okay. Now, when we take a look here at this current price action here for Ethereum, we are in a positive state, right? We've broken our descending trend line. We're at a 9 on TD sequential, which does imply a short-term correction lower. That's why this is here, just kind of give you some perspective on where we may see a pivot and or bounce. Once more, the CME gap is below the price here in this 39.50 to 40.50 range, okay? So there's a good chance that we do see the price retest this area here once more. But between now and then, the longer we stay in this range, the more likely we are to break out. Okay, so that's the same thing with Bitcoin too. It keeps maintaining 115. We're in a position right now where we're probably going to see that that potential continuation higher if we stay in this range for a lot longer. Okay, so daily time frame kind of tells us the same story. Just kind of clarify too, our point of control for Ethereum, it's 4,300 if I recall correctly. It's right here at this range. So once more, if we come up to that 0.618 fib level, that $4,300 range, we can expect some resistance because there's areas of confluence above the price. We can also see the 50-day SMA above the price action too, kind of suppressing that. But more important thing here is to understand that there's some good convergences on the daily time frame. We've broken mostly bullish, and the same thing here with 50 in the RSI. So those are usually some really good signs here as a foundation to feel confident taking more so a long position versus a short position. So that's kind of my thoughts there on Ethereum. 4-hour time frame also very bullish in the short term. Once more overextended, but still bullish, right? So be mindful that overextensions don't always work out, and coins don't always pull back based on overextensions, but for the most part at this point, we can presume that a short-term continuation lower with CME gaps, some fundamental catalysts later on the week, and of course, that liquidation. A lot of those things are kind of incentivizing the price to pull back on the short term. But once more, macro structures starting to break bullish, and we're in a pretty good shape here. I think overall the sentiment is positive for this coin. All right, let's take a look here at Solana next. I would say we could pretty much copy and paste the same explanation for Ethereum on Solana. Probably even a majority of these other coins here too, based on the fact that they're bullish on both lower and larger timeframes. Now, super low timeframes, we're seeing those overextensions, but that's not a reason to consider, shorting a coin per se, right? So let's take a quick look at the back-end liquidation data and just kind of understand here from an open interest perspective, 195 to 190 is that solid support range. So if we do see that area again, good consideration for a long or possibly a take profit target on a short, because once more, 195 is that area of open interest and that CME gap just below the price, right? So keep that in mind. Now, liquidation delta is still to the green, right? We're still seeing a lot more longs than shorts, basically implying further upside. We can see a lot of liquidation here is down as low as 185. If we retest 190, that might be a possibility, but I still think that's a low likelihood that we see that range here, just based on a lot of convergences and multiple confirming factors here. Take a look at the daily time frame for Solana. I just kind of want to draw this, paint this picture here for us. We haven't broken bullish by any stretch, right? Because we're still under the 50-day SMA and or this descending trend. So trying to get too ahead of yourselves, right? It's easy to want to do that when you see these little breakouts. Now, it doesn't mean that this can't continue. It just implies that once more, larger picture, we haven't fully broken above these key levels. And the key levels to me is 203. This is that point of control here locally, but also this descending trend line. So, closure at 205 or higher for the next week or so, that would put us in a really good shape. Between now and then, there's a lot that can happen, right? Obviously, we already looked at the fundamentals. We can see stochastic and MACD are both converging. 50 in the RSI is breached at this point, but money flow index is still rather low. So I don't love to see low MFI leading into this. It shows a little bit of weakness on this breakout. So there's possibilities of a short-term reversal. But once more, that's pretty much the premise here, right? And I have this kind of drawn out. 195 is that local, kind of that support range for us. That's where the CME gap is at. We see the most amount of control here locally too, based on volume. There's a lot of things pointing towards 195. So whether or not that happens is irrelevant. What's relevant is if it does happen, that is a pretty solid support range that we should experience some slowing pressure to the downside. So what I'm hoping for to see this week is to see Bitcoin come in the 111 to 113K range. Ethereum, obviously, the 3950 to 4,000, but also 190 to 195 for Solana, so we can take a long. All right, that's kind of the concept. Between now and then, it's probably best just to wait and pump the brakes or consider a tight short, maybe. But once more, I emphasize considering a short in the sense of making sure that it's super tight and super responsible. If you're going to do that, don't be a total idiot that's trying to short to the ground floor, right? I mean that with all due respect. Just seriously, like some people, it's crazy the kind of trades that they take, and they expect some ridiculous results from it. Anyways, that's kind of where we're at for Solana. Looking pretty good overall. All right, SUI, what's going on with you? Let's go ahead and take a look at SUI here. Just before you do, I want to just remind you that there is an awesome reward bonus here, and of course, a deposit reward bonus for Bitunix. Link down below. Check them out, folks. They're an awesome exchange. I like to recommend them because our community's been trading with them for over 2 years. We've been with them for a long time, and they're a fantastic exchange. All right, so moving on to the backend data for SUI. Let's look at this here. First of all, when we kind of double check a few things, 255, 250, and then 240 roughly. Now, these are rough estimates, of course, but these large round numbers are basically tending to be more consistent with SUI. So I wouldn't be surprised if we continue down lower. 255 to 250 is that local area of support. But we're starting to see a shift in momentum here, right? We're starting to see less longs in the market, basically implying that we're seeing a little bit of early weakness. But when we look at the liquidation, there's not a ton of liquidation locally here. So I'm not super incentivized to want to take a trade because with less heavy concentrations close by, there's less potential for that to be hit quickly and fast. Now, this coin moves fast, so don't get me wrong, that's really not a problem that you have to worry about. But it's still just confirming factor I like to look for that isn't present. What is present is this overextension leading into this local resistance range about 267. So we can see that kind of holding so far so strong. Now keep in mind, this does look like a nice little cup and handle type of pattern here. And these do have a tendency of breaking out a little higher statistical rate than others, just because the simple fact that they retest resistances in most cases, and they oftentimes work themselves into bullish flag patterns. And bull flags are, once again, have a higher success rate of conversion because it's retesting specific levels multiple times, and inevitably you break in a descending channel. So we're probably in that position right now, I'm guessing. So I'm willing to speculate if we, again, we do see a pullback, it's generally going to be to that halfway mark or that 0.382 level. Now, what I mean by that is if you draw out your fib levels here and you take this local extension, we can see we're probably going to be coming back down to this level here, right in the 255 to 250 range. So those are areas that I'm going to be looking for as a potential pivot or bounce. So that's just kind of something to think about. Daily time frame, though, if we look at this here, we're still in pretty terrible shape. So there's no way to sugarcoat it. We're not like in a phenomenal situation where the price is just going to take off from here. Now, there's a good chance it will. I'm still leaning more towards $3 being more of a reality than $2 at this point. Obviously, we're closer to that, but we also have good foundational benefit here. We're seeing a lot of bottoming, but MACD's converging once more. Very similar structure on the larger time frame. Only this coin doesn't quite have its convergence. We're not seeing that 50 on the RSI yet. So it leads me to believe this coin has a lot more room for growth before it has a potential for a significant breakout. But short term, I think we're due to see a little bit of a cup and handle here soon. So I'm going to be interested in once more the 250 to 255 range for this coin. What do you think? Comment below. All right, let's jump on into the XRP chart. This XRP coin is misbehaving, to say the least. We do have a short position open with this coin, mainly because I know that 270, 275 range is a solid resistance. And the premise there, just in case you're not familiar, maybe you're new to the channel, welcome aboard, by the way. We can see that there's a significant amount of support here previously before it broke. And if you're not familiar, support ranges generally work as resistances moving forward. So that in combination with us being at an 8 on TD sequential, we've been moving 8 days in a row into this key level resistance range. What do you think is going to happen? Well, the probability of the price breaking out is pretty low. It could still happen, but I think it's pretty low here just based on the simple fact that there's just a tremendous amount of resistance between that local resistance range of 275 to 270. Let's quickly double check this here because obviously we're seeing a pretty significant situation here with XRP. And then if we look on the left-hand side with Bitcoin, you can see Bitcoin's kind of working itself into, I wouldn't say a head and shoulders pattern, but obviously we are in a position where that could happen, right? Okay. This is the worst drawing you could ever see here, but the whole concept remains the same, that XRP is ranging better than Bitcoin is. So it has more propensity for a breakout here, just based on the short-term time frame. Now, when we look at the back-end data, if I recall correctly, XRP did have some areas of confluence below the price. So let's double check this here. Once more, 245 to 250 is that solid area of open interest below the price. It's kind of spread out though, honestly, so it's hard to really diagnose what those levels are. But generally speaking, the more open interest you have below the price, the more likely it is to retest those levels, but it's also more likely to hold those levels once they are. Because that's, again, an area where there's a gravitational type of pull towards it. Generally, that's why liquidation occurs at open interest and vice versa. And that's why those levels kind of happen, because they're just areas that people want to get in, right? So it's an interested area. So all that said, when we look at liquidation delta, we're at about 700 million. That's pretty strong for this coin, but it is pretty well overextended, including a weekend overextension. So it's not really super trustworthy. And if we look here as well, while there is liquidation upwards of 270, and that's probably likely the next target for this coin, we're probably going to see this area down below at 260 or 255 next. That makes a lot more sense than too much higher moving forward. Now, let's take a look at the chart here. And we've already diagnosed that we are really close to an overextended state on the daily time frame. When we look at the overextensions here, we are seeing MACDs converging. Stochastic is starting to top out with money flow index still low and the RSI above. Generally speaking, that's a sign of weakness, because if you kind of take a look at this volume is not very high. This is pretty low, right? Now, granted, it's high because of this weekend, of course, was factored in. But if you're taking the last 14 days worth of buying pressure, we're looking at there's more money flowing away from this coin than into the coin overall based on the last 14-day candles. This is once again the money flow index indicator. It's kind of letting us know that we're seeing a divergence there, and that's generally showing weakness. So to me, I don't really like trading into that as far as longs are concerned, especially when we're fairly well overextended. And if you look at this here, we reached an overextended state with 36 hours of continuation at 257. Somehow this weekend, the price continues to pump with no retracement whatsoever, no regard for that, and the likelihood of further downside is higher because of that. Okay. Now, once more, from a fundamental standpoint, I'm sure there's somebody tweeting and doing something kind of Yeah, something's probably happening with this coin to push it a little bit higher than normal. But from a technical standpoint, it has all the signs that it needs to reverse itself soon, right? Otherwise, we're going to reach a significant selling event, and that's going to be bad too. So if we want to see a nice continued progression, a retracement to that 255 to 260 range would make a lot more sense than the price going too much higher. Once more, you can't rule out the fact that there's liquidation at 270. That could very well be the next stop first before it pulls back. But depending on what kind of position you're trying to take, it just makes sense to not take a long at this exact moment because of the simple fact that while it's showing bullish convergences, these are really not things that there's a lot of little kinks in the chain here or cracks in the glass, whatever term you want to use to describe it. There's reasons why we're going to see a short-term correction. There's slightly larger probabilities of that happening. Okay, so once again, from a statistical standpoint, I still feel like XRP is going to go down. I'm not saying that because we have a short open. I'm saying that because of everything I just talked about. Right. So again, just use logic when you trade, folks. It's simple as that. You're not always going to win. Don't get wrong. I mean, there's nothing is perfect in trading, right? It's always changing, always evolving, and you have to as well. So just try not to get too comfortable in this environment. It's the discomfort that should make you a better trader. Anyways, thanks again for being an awesome part of my life. Deeply appreciate you. Look forward to work with you in the future. Once more, there are only 2 slots left available for our permanent access on my October sale. So if you're not familiar with that, you want to jump into our it's our announcements section under our Discord, and you can kind of find all the details here for this here. I need to update it, but we are looking at 2 slots left for October 31st deadline. Anyways, just some friendly advice there. We'll look forward to working with you. Have a good rest of your day. See you in the next one. Take care.